Hey, Bitcoin wealth builders. Welcome to episode 83 of Bitcoin Hard Talk. Today, we're going to be sharing the overarching theme of the entire episode is how to make yourself great again. If you're on X, please do hashtag me, MYGA, make yourself great again, and let me know what questions you have or what you'd like to see covered in these episodes. Now, the reason I've called this episode Make Yourself Great Again, as when I go through this week in Bitcoin, this week in macro, and this week in geopolitics, you'll find out that you need to follow the money and not listen to what they're saying about make America great again, because you can make yourself great again as long as you don't listen to them. You follow the money and you do the opposite of what they're telling you to do. And so that's the overarching theme. Now, this week in Bitcoin, we're going to be covering everything that happened that I think is significant in the Bitcoin2025 conference. There were 3 days in Las Vegas. I think each of the videos, if you wanted to watch the live broadcast, is like 9 hours long or something. I'll let you know what you need to know in case you weren't there. I'm also going to be doing a voiceover or a walkthrough of Trump's plan from a recent Congress hearing and help you understand what the difference is between what you're being told is happening relative to what is actually happening. And this is going to be from the context of the recent stablecoin bill and the Genius Act that's coming through. That's going to be a little bit longer. We're going to cover a lot of time on the Bitcoin section today. In part two, we're going to be going through this week in macro. We'll be covering the latest in tariffs, how the Gulf Cooperation Council, GCC, is reacting, and how BRICS have been reacting, and the deals that you're not hearing about in Western media if you don't follow the types of things that I follow, where you can understand it's impossible to analyze what's happening in America if you don't look at the wider macro picture and the challenges ahead. And then finally, in part three, we're going to be going through the Gaza ceasefire, which has been announced, and the Iran nuclear deal, which is currently being negotiated. I'll share with you, based upon my Bitcoin understanding, my macro understanding in part 1 and 2, and all of the previous broadcasts that we have been going through, where I think this goes next and why it is probably a once in a 100-year deal that is currently happening, so that you can understand by following the money. And so without further ado, let's go through Bitcoin Hard Talk, episode 83, Make Yourself Great Again. If we have not met before, lots of new people to the show. We've almost hit 100,000 subscribers. We're very close to the goal. If you're new to the show, hit the subscribe button, hit the bell symbol, hit all. And once we get past 100,000 subscribers, we're going to be able to get the channel reviewed and get this message out to more people. I've spent the last 25 years of my life obsessing over the topic of investing and money. And when Bitcoin launched, Bitcoin as well. And so let's jump straight in to part 1, this week in Bitcoin. Okay, so there was the conference, Bitcoin2025. Now, here's the overarching theme. I'm not going to go through everything, but if there was one takeaway, this is a very, very different conference to the Bitcoin conferences when I used to go back in the day. My first one was in 2011, 2 years after Bitcoin launched. I stopped at a certain point because ransom is a thing. I have a security strategy, and it does not involve going to Bitcoin conferences anymore. But with today's technology, you can catch up on everything you need to know anyway. So what are the 3 overarching themes? Right. Firstly, TradFi is in. Everything I've been warning you about in Bitcoin over the last episodes of Bitcoin Hard Talk, it all comes into play. There was pitch after pitch after pitch, booth after booth after booth, speaker after speaker after speaker of people that weren't around, that are new to the industry and have been getting involved in Bitcoin financial services. And some of the people that have been around for a while, they want you to borrow against your Bitcoin. That is the most prevalent theme. And if you've been watching any of my episodes, you know the pitfalls of that. You know my forecast around that. And you need to risk manage that accordingly. You can catch up on previous episodes if you want. The second thing they want you to do in Bitcoin 2025, they want you to buy their shares in a public company on the stock market or a SPAC or a reverse merger or acquisition, because rather than buying Bitcoin, they want you to buy their shares instead so that they can buy their Bitcoin, and then they can pay their salaries and all the other leverage and games that they can play on top. So they want you to buy shares rather than buy your own Bitcoin. The third overarching theme is that they want you to bag hold US treasuries and US debt, because they are running out of places to roll over the debt in the US to. And what they want to do is back newly issued stable coins by those US treasuries. As yields start going up in price, they get a free treasury, you get a stable coin, and then they get to take the yield, which is the higher the long-term rates of the 10-year and 30-year treasuries that we'll be covering in the macro section, the more Bitcoin they get to buy, and the more they get to essentially get a free trade of short the dollar, long Bitcoin that I've been covering in other episodes as well. Now, eventually, hopefully some of these give yield on, but regulations are being put in place so that they get a 2-year head start, try and get as much Bitcoin as possible, while the new world order and the multipolar world order that I've been talking about gets reset, because there is $10 trillion that needs to be refinanced. And last week we covered that the 20-year auction, they weren't able to subscribe to it in this debt-based Ponzi scheme, and it wasn't as successful as it needed to be. So they want you to buy their stablecoin, and there is stablecoin after stablecoin after stablecoin, as well as the OGs and the original stablecoin issuers as well, which we'll be going through. Right, the rule of Bitcoin Hard Talk. All you need to do is the opposite of what everyone wants you to do at Bitcoin 2025, which is don't borrow against your Bitcoin, just own your Bitcoin. Don't put it in margin. Don't put yourself in a position where you get margin called. And you can own your Bitcoin in self-custody. Don't buy Bitcoin shares. Make sure that you've got your own Bitcoin held in self-custody. And you don't need their stable coins, because you can try and figure out how you earn the Bitcoin rather than getting them. Now, those rules don't apply across the board, but if you are very early to Bitcoin, your job is to get as much Bitcoin as possible and make sure it's the real Bitcoin, because the journey you need to travel to in this world of Bitcoin AI and artificial intelligence and central bank digital currencies that we are moving to at a faster and faster pace, you need to hold it in self-custody. You need to own your own Bitcoin, and then you can play the games and maximize what you get and all the other things as a part of a risk managed strategy as well. So do the opposite of what they're saying you should do. You'll be fine. So the Bitcoin 2025 conference started out with some pre-presentations. One of the early ones was Michael Saylor from Strategy, previously MicroStrategy, MSTR, which is approaching and trying to hold and get 600,000 Bitcoin. Now, it used to trade, the share price used to trade at a significant premium over the value of the Bitcoin. Now it is getting closer and closer to parity. And there were questions around whether it would trade at a discount. And now people were asking the questions because anyone that was around in 2021, 2022, you'll know that there was a different product, very different, but people have memories because, you know, things rhyme. They're not going to be exactly the same. But there was a product called GBTC, which was created by Barry Silbert, which was a mechanism for getting you to buy his shares instead of Bitcoin. And it used to trade at a massive premium. Then it traded at a discount. And this messed up a bunch of hedge funds that were trying to arbitrage the difference between the price of the actual Bitcoin and the shares. And this led to a cascading liquidation effect eventually that led to a crash in the price of Bitcoin, liquidation of all the Bitcoin-backed loans that I covered on previous episodes. And then the Bitcoin then goes, some of the companies go into bankruptcy. They dollarize your Bitcoin. And then eventually they end up auctioning off the Bitcoin. You get a dollar claim and a bunch of rich people end up with all the Bitcoin. And that is what happened now. I've been warning against that. And throughout Bitcoin 2025, my skepticism around the traditional financial players setting up a similar structure is only gone stronger. And so there was questions around that. And one of the things that was a very strange question, well, not a strange question, it was a great question, but a strange answer, was the request from somebody in the audience to say, can you do proof of reserves to demonstrate that you own those Bitcoin in MicroStrategy? Now, my speculation is that MicroStrategy custodies them with Coinbase, and Coinbase doesn't segregate wallets. And so there is probably no setup by which he can do proof of reserves without changing the custody relationship and changing that. But instead of saying that, he laid into anyone that is doing proof of reserves. Now, proof of reserves means that you publish your wallet address, and it is a public key, not a private key. A public key is kind of like a broadcast to the network. Anyone can see. It doesn't mean you can pull Bitcoin out of it. But he started to talk about how publishing public keys is a security risk and a security vulnerability, even though this is the best practice in our industry and in our sector. And so it was a very unpopular answer. Now, half of what he said was true, which is that people can publish their wallet address and they can do proof of reserves, but you have to have an audit in order to know whether anyone's borrowing against them or there's contracts against them or the trades happening. But at the same time, MicroStrategy is no longer just shares. It is all sorts of financial products and all sorts of financial engineering in order to generate arbitrage between leverage and options and all sorts of different products. And it is starting to get towards the type of thing that I warn people against, that these returns that they're generating on some of the other products are starting to reach that territory of too good to be true. And therefore, you don't know, maybe he's saying, I don't want to prove my reserves because then people could see my options trading strategies or whatever they're doing with those for other types of products within the shares, whatever the ecosystem is. But it is still a black box at this stage that is subject to a human audit, and a human audit is the best practice. You have fiduciary duties, you have punishments and all sorts of stuff that he did say correctly, but there is nothing to stop you also publishing your wallet address unless there is an alternative reason. And this is what created a lot of skepticism. And you know that I've been very skeptical about Michael Saylor's very fast rise to fame. My skepticism around that. And so I wonder why he won't publish his proof of reserves, because interestingly, Paolo, the CTO and CEO of Tether, was also giving a presentation and shared that they have over 100,000 Bitcoin as part of their reserve pools, but the vast majority of it is backed by treasuries, which are held with Cantor Fitzgerald, but they publish their wallet addresses, and so do many of the major exchanges. Yes, it doesn't solve what are they doing with that, and you have to have different types of audits in the TradFi world. However, combining it with publishing your wallet address means that they can't be moved unless you go under additional scrutiny, and so therefore it is an open question. And that gives me a little bit more skepticism. Other announcements on Bitcoin 2025 was people representing the Pakistani government. They said that they are going to be allocating 2,000 megawatts of its surplus energy for Bitcoin mining. Now, this is a bit of a controversial subject because a country that really is if you've been watching any of my geopolitical side, you'll know that there was CIA intervention that led to Imran Khan being put in prison and then puppet governments being installed. And they're kind of in the middle between a proxy war between China's Belt and Road Initiative and the IMF. And then they are also a vassal state that is trying to be targeted by the proof of weapons network, where I call the proof of weapons network, where BlackRock is kind of the CEO. I've covered more details on that on previous episodes. And there were the recent tensions between Pakistan and India. But Pakistan is deeply indebted to the IMF. Their dollar reserves were running out, and so China has been stepping in, trying to rebuild. And again, it's in a proxy war. But the level of poverty, is interesting. That with challenges around energy all around, that there's this puppet government that is in place at the moment in the midst of a proxy war. And they allocate some of their resources towards Bitcoin mining. Now, I think this is the right way of doing it. If you're going to be involved in a Bitcoin strategic reserve strategy, then you want to build independence so you can fight back against it, and fight back against some of those different things. And mining is a good way of doing it if you don't have sovereign wealth and resources, so like some of the surplus countries. But they are saying that they've got about 10,000 megawatts of spare surplus electricity, and they're going to be allocating 2,000 of it towards Bitcoin mining so that they can stabilize their grid structures. Now, the theory works out, and we shall see what they do with that. But demand transparency. Don't listen to the Michael Saylor approach where you end up custodying them with Coinbase or something. They should be doing the El Salvador strategy where they publish their wallet address. You can see all the mined Bitcoin coming in from the mining pool. And then Pakistan can actually see that they are building those surplus reserves. They can see the efficiency improvement, and they can do it the right way rather than the corrupt way. So that is what I would say on top of it. But other than that, it is good to see whether this actually materializes or not, that a country like Pakistan may be able to, in theory, fight back against a proof of weapons network, build some sovereign wealth using Bitcoin mining, stabilize those energy grids, and provide transparency to their people. One of the things that I always said when I met with President Bukele, I said the mistake that I thought El Salvador made is that he didn't, when they issued $20 worth of Bitcoin for everybody that had a national ID, they should have locked it into a retirement plan structure, and they should have combined it with some of the lessons that you learned from, say, Singapore when it was decolonizing. They created products where the local population could get favorable terms in buying land and mortgages so that they felt like a shareholder in the country. They implement a Bitcoin strategy and they're locked in until retirement. That didn't happen in Singapore. That happened in El Salvador. But if they had locked it in rather than allowing people out, then as more and more Bitcoiners come along, they tend to target these wealthy Bitcoiners. That drives up the price of real estate, but you want your local population to feel like shareholders in the country rather than just having all these rich people come through. And then you can really replicate the success of the Singapore strategy, and you can really harmonize it around Bitcoin. And that's what I suggest a country does. If I were ever in charge of a country, that's the exact strategy that I would follow. But we shall see whether you can do these, whether any country does these types of things yet. That's the real strategy, to really embrace a population around Bitcoin, build sovereign wealth. But anyway, Pakistan, in theory, at this stage, it will be another story that I will keep watching. They could mine their way out of the China and US proxy war, the playground that comes from that. And then you end up on the wrong side of the proof of weapons network, where BlackRock and the military industrial complex end up selling lots of weapons to India. And then you end up having these unnatural progressions where you have these groups, these militia groups that foreign agencies fund. And they do that in order to create violence so you can justify wars. They call it terrorism when it is actually unnatural interference in order to try and weaken and create a civil unrest campaign, which is the playbook of the West and the American empire that is currently being decolonized from the Middle East. And I'd love for Pakistan to build some sovereign wealth and see if they can prove this is what I call sovereignty through Bitcoin mining, if done correctly. Okay, we shall watch that space and I'll keep covering it. At the same time, the ex-founder of Twitter, Jack Dorsey, his company Block, they are going to be launching a Bitcoin Lightning payments into all Stripe payment terminals. And so they have these Stripe payment terminals, which are fiat currency for merchant processors. You're able to turn your phone into a merchant processing terminal. And now they're going to be integrating with Bitcoin Lightning payments. At the same time, Tether said they're going to be launching stable coins on top of Bitcoin Lightning. Now, because Bitcoin the layer 1 of it can only handle about 7 transactions per second because it competes for block space. Layer 2, Lightning Network, was created for private transactions and infinitely scalable transactions and this is what Lightning is. It's had slow adoption rate, but once you can do stable coins on top of Lightning, this is infinitely more scalable than doing it on layer 1 Bitcoin or even alternative chains, which is where all the stable coin volume went. And so it is building up towards this payment layer on top of Bitcoin, which was one of the original use cases, which we shall start to see if it starts to get more and more adoption as well. We had announcements from public company after public company. One of the ones that the next one, I guess, that made an announcement that is progressing is GameStop. And so GameStop announced that they have purchased $500 million, $500 million worth of Bitcoin already. They hold approximately $5.5 billion worth of cash on their balance sheet, and they've made their first purchase. So we shall see how much of that goes into Bitcoin. But currently, the market capitalization of the company GameStop, GME, last time I checked, it was approximately $15.5 billion. And we'll see where it goes next. We also had announcements from many uprising politicians that were using Bitcoin to try and gain popularity, as we saw last year. And the New York City, a rising politician there, is planning to, if he gets elected, issue a Bitcoin bond. This is Mayor Eric Adams. And he said that if he gets elected, or I'm not sure of the exact situation, maybe you can correct me in the comments what his current situation is. Not sure what degree of influence he has and whether he could do this, but he was putting out that he will launch a Bit bond for New York. Now, we all know that New York will be the hardest place to do this. He also wanted to rescind the Bit license, which was an early kind of way of capturing Bitcoin into Wall Street. New York is the most important state in terms of TradFi. He wants to rescind that to free New York of some of the more restrictive regulations from the old legacy Bit license and launch a Bit bond. And so whether that happens or not, that was the announcement anyway from Eric Adams, if anyone wants to support that and follow that along. The company that I have been skeptical about, because essentially it is a deep state construct of taking, some of the members of the Bitcoin community, Jack Mallers, and, a guy that was involved in the El Salvador project. He has been enrolled into via Tether, some of the deep state partners like Cantor Fitzgerald and SoftBank. And they are continuing to buy. They did a SPAC, which is basically a public company shell. And then they start buying Bitcoin into it, restructure the company. But they made their first purchase of Bitcoin, and they just raised another approximately, 685 million, approximately $700 million in order to buy more Bitcoin. So this is trying to catch up with MicroStrategy. We'll see what the operating business is. But as I said, this really was Bitcoin 2025, a sales pitch for companies that want you to buy their shares so that they can buy Bitcoin, and companies that want you to custody their Bitcoin with them so that they can issue you a dollar loan and you can be subject to margin calls of Bitcoin with volatility. We also had politicians from UK Reform Party. It is a popular party. Nigel Farage was involved in the exit of UK Brexit, the infamous Brexit, from the European Union. And Nigel Farage is the leader of the Reform Party. And it is kind of one of those divide and conquer types of parties, those that believe in, pissed off with immigration, which is also some of the PSYOP strategies in order to create divide and conquer. The deep state funds various types of players in order to support. He had a bit of a tuffle from Israeli agent Tommy Robinson. And then you have these different characters like Nigel Farage that can play upon these different types of divide and conquer civil unrest strategies. You have to check where they get their funding from. As we said, all politicians serve a purpose, and they all work for the corporate interests that they need to work for. But anyway, Nigel Farage is looking at using a strategic Bitcoin reserve bill for the UK, and he would like to introduce that if he comes into political power. The likelihood of that happening, because I don't believe he is sponsored by BlackRock to go into power, and those that get selected like Keir Starmer in order to destroy the country and work for the military industrial complex, not work for the UK people, and find mechanisms for basically stealing money from the British people, handing it over to military contractors like the BlackRock portfolio companies via proxy partnerships with Trump and the US, US, which is the main proxy for the corporations and BlackRock's portfolio companies, so that you can siphon off money from the British people. You can push narratives through organizations like USAID that funds the BBC. And when you want to flip the narrative from we are defending democracy, then you can print billions and billions of dollars in military contracts, as is the case in the destabilization campaign that was the CIA operation between Russia and Ukraine. And now BlackRock owns over 50% of the land. US gets all the rare earth minerals, and you can push these different types of campaigns. And now there is a campaign to say Israel is no longer our best friend. I'll cover more of that in the geopolitical section. But this is, how they use the media in order to push these narratives. Well, that's why I don't believe that this will genuinely, lead to that, because Keir Starmer's the man to implement that mission, and they all have different missions for the relative, the different types of lobby groups that they work for. Back on the US side, we had announcements from Cynthia Lummis, who is introducing the Bitcoin Act. And she said that the Bitcoin Act, in order to buy 1 million Bitcoin in a revenue neutral way, which means you can't spend taxpayers' money, you can't spend additional money, but you can take the strategic reserves like gold, you can reprice them, and you can use that in order to buy Bitcoin. They said the bill should be coming out next week, and it should hit the floor next week. Now, I don't think the Bitcoin strategic reserve at the federal level is likely to get through. I will keep watching that and tell you if it turns out to be wrong, but they seem to be getting through at the state level, because I believe that BlackRock's strategy is to shrink America into a regional power, as I'll cover more in the macro section. And maybe that involves somewhat of decentralization, breaking up the states, giving state power, weakening federal power, and we shall see. There were comments from Trump's crypto czar, which is David Sachs. He's leading the AI and crypto strategy for the Trump administration. And he said that the US government may buy more Bitcoin, and it can be done. And if it can be done in a budget neutral way. So reiterating that they won't be buying Bitcoin, that they'll try and do a budget neutral strategy. Meanwhile, after Operation Choke Point 2.0 in 2023, which was exerted through, I believe, the Fed and BlackRock via the Biden administration in order to get ready for what they were going to do in 2024, which is approve the Bitcoin ETF, get as many of traditional financial players into Bitcoin, knowing that there would be these wider geopolitical games that would reset the world order, as I will be covering more in this week in the geopolitical section and the macro section. Once you reset the board, you then come in with a pro-crypto strategy. You install Trump. Trump then has the stable coins to roll over the debt so that those can benefit from all the yields that comes from issuing stable coins at higher interest rates. And you can get all of your buddies into Bitcoin through the Bitcoin ETF while you manage this transition and try and get as many people to, rather than own Bitcoin through BlackRock. And so we are starting to see all of this month BlackRock's spot Bitcoin ETF, IBIT. It had 30 straight days where there were no outflows, which means that always in every day, dollars were going out of fiat currency and purchasing those shares which are backed by Bitcoin. Ideally, you should be buying your own Bitcoin, but there was zero outflows for the last 30 days. And that also led to announcements from the SEC. Hester Peirce was there, very pro-Bitcoin and pro-crypto representation within the SEC. But the SEC said that it is going to be hosting an asset management conference, which is going to be featuring digital, basically discussing digital assets. And all of the TradFi players are going to be there. BlackRock, Fidelity, Franklin Templeton, they're all going to be in attendance. And this is going to be moving to the next phase where I think they'll be using real world assets and tokenizing everything to transition America into a technocracy, continue the destabilization campaign in Europe and UK, and then make it where you can tokenize all these different assets into this full technocracy that is the global agenda and the future of the West, while they reposition how you can outflow all of those assets into the trends and the multipolar world order that I've been covering. Well, anyway, they'll be deregulating in order for traditional financial players that will get a seat at the table and working with the SEC in order to make that a more friendly environment for the traditional financial players. There was an announcement from the SEC to state that staking proof of stake networks do not involve securities. So what that essentially means is that now that BlackRock has the Bitcoin ETF, rather than you owning your own Bitcoin and doing what, for example, you can stake your own ETH, for example, as a proof of stake network, convert the stake to Bitcoin. Rather than you doing that, they would rather you own ETH via BlackRock, and then BlackRock can stake it, and a stake, which is very different to Bitcoin. This is why proof of work is so different to proof of stake. When you have a proof of stake network, like Ethereum transitioned from proof of work to proof of stake, you can, by handing it over to BlackRock, they get the stake, they get influence over the network, and so now they can transition the Ethereum ETFs into giving you your staking yield, and they can gain more control. And so when BlackRock wants to tokenize everything, they may do it upon Ethereum, and then they can gain more control and they can distribute it amongst the proof of weapons network using the proof of stake network as we transition to this super power which we have right now, which supersedes all governments, and governments essentially work for the BlackRock portfolio companies. And this is the next phase of that strategy. We also had an announcement from the SEC that is going to be dropping the lawsuit against Binance. This is at the same time as what I'm going to be covering in the video, where we go through a presentation around what I think Trump's strategy is and his role as essentially a US proxy and US proxy president for BlackRock's portfolio companies. And so at the same time, BlackRock said that it is going to be acquiring 10% of Circle. Now, you know that I was an early shareholder in Circle. The Bank to the Future, the company I co-founded, has a secondary market where people can get exposure in private equity in companies like Circle. But they are due to go public. And before going public, they sold a 10% stake to BlackRock, which sets the valuation. And so once you set the valuation, if you want to merge that into Coinbase or you want to go public, we shall see what happens. Then you have set a higher valuation. And that is a smart strategy. And they can decide to go with BlackRock using USDC as their primary stablecoin issuer, as it resets the world into this multipolar world order that it is pushing the world to. And taking a 10% stake in Circle. I had that with another company I invested in a long time ago called Securitize, and BlackRock seems to be sniffing around. I'll share the ones that are public information, but you're starting to see more of that. Securitize is involved in the security token side, but you're seeing this deregulation environment, and you can clearly see that stablecoins backed by US debt is going to be used as a mechanism for controlling capital flows as we move into this multipolar world order that I think BlackRock and their portfolio companies have been pushing the world to. Now, what is stablecoins? And we'll go through a video shortly where we're going to be critiquing Trump. But stablecoins are essentially a debt crisis solution because they learned from Tether that you can back it by bonds, and that's why they're distributing to issuers like Trump's family himself, that are going to be the future issuers, and they're going to be holding those assets with Cantor Fitzgerald. Cantor Fitzgerald, which is connected as a Federal Reserve discount broker. So if you want to do radical monetary policy and you want to roll over the debt-based Ponzi scheme, you can get those that own stable coins to be the bag holder, as the real market for bonds, the 10-year and 30-year treasury, is going to be demanding a higher and higher interest. And we'll cover more about that in this week in macro. And so, you know, at the same time, the deep state actor, Cantor Fitzgerald, had his son, just as Trump is using his sons in order to accumulate vast wealth as we get to the end of the debt-based dollar Ponzi scheme, to get as much Bitcoin as possible and line up their investments. Cantor Fitzgerald is doing the same strategy. Cantor is being handed over to Howard Lutnick's son, while Howard Lutnick works for the Trump administration and gets his son to run Cantor Fitzgerald. And they announced that they're going to be launching they called it a gold-backed Bitcoin fund. What the pitch is essentially a fund. I haven't looked deeply into this. I'll look deeply into it as more details come through. But the idea is that you get protected by the downside of gold while you get the upside of Bitcoin. I think that just means a fund that's going to buy Bitcoin and buy gold for you, rather than you owning gold and you owning your own Bitcoin and them doing some kind of strategy where they think is protected. It's not going to be a flaw or anything. But, you know, by having gold and Bitcoin in a fund, they're able to frame it as a gold-backed Bitcoin fund rather than, you know, based upon, again, shorting the dollar, using dollars, using gold, using Bitcoin, in line with what these deep state actors know the world is being transitioned to, which is this multipolar world order I've been covering for an awful long time. And what about Trump Media, another Trump-connected company? They announced that they have done a $2.5 billion deals in order to create a Bitcoin treasury of the public company that was set up with Truth Social, which is being used in order to perpetuate out these different narratives, which I believe is being used by many of the traditional main Wall Street players that get insider information to get ahead of trades. And you can have this reconsolidation of hedge funds around those connected to the Trump administration. Well, they're going to be putting Bitcoin in there so he can protect his public company. He can protect his the last bits of debt and the dollar and earn as much Bitcoin. And essentially everything is saying MAGA is probably not going to have Bitcoin strategic reserves, but the Trump family are going to have Bitcoin strategic reserves. So you should be following as well. There was also another company, which is Eric Trump and Donald Trump Jr., that did a partnership with Hut 8 that I've been covering. American Bitcoin, they're going to be doing more and more Bitcoin mining to get as much Bitcoin as possible from efficient allocation of energy grids, as we discussed earlier in the Pakistani Bitcoin strategic reserves as well. Again, all of this is the effect of saying we're not bullish on the dollar, but we are bullish on Bitcoin. And we want as much of the yield from the higher rates at the expense of the American people over to personal enrichment as well. And we had Lutnick's sons that were all at the conference looking to do the same thing. We had Steve Witkoff's sons that were there looking at what they can do to get as much Bitcoin. We had Trump's sons there. We also had Vivek Ramaswamy, that is through his Strike, I think is Stripe or Strife, I can't quite remember, fund, asset management. All of the politicians know what's coming next, and they are looking to personally capitalize and protect themselves, which is why you should make yourself great again. Follow the money. It's not Trump derangement syndrome. If you look back at all of my broadcasts, I covered this throughout the whole Biden administration and all the corruption that happens there because of the structural nature of the fact that the whole of America has been financialized. And so engaging in politics is simply tools for the corporations that control America as well. And so when Biden was the scammer, I also covered exactly what Biden was doing as well. And now Trump is the scammer that is giving you a different story. I'll be sharing exactly what Trump is doing, and I'll be making sure that you have the tools to make yourself great again. So with that in mind, I would like to demonstrate. I've got a 20-minute video. I'll break it up into approximately 3 to 5 minute segments, and then I'll be sharing with you. Now, this isn't about partisan politics. I'm not left, I'm not right. I think that's a psyop to distract you from how to really engage, and I'm going to be sharing what I think you should be doing if you want to engage in influencing the future of America. And guess what? It's not engaging in Republican, Democrat politics. It's engaging with the real forces that can actually make a difference. And I'll share those with you after this video. But before that, I want to demonstrate without a shadow of a doubt, because I'm not saying I support this politician or I support some of the Democrat and the political maneuvers that are being used here. I'm just saying that there was not anything in this video that I wasn't already covering in Bitcoin Hard Talk, and is facts. And it's just let's just call it what it actually is. It's point bank corruption. And if you follow if you follow what they say and the media says, instead of making yourself great again and follow the money, I just want to demonstrate to you so that you have this as well. So Azad, can we play the video that I set aside where there is some politicians in Congress, and they're going to be sharing many of the things, and we'll go through the first part, and then I'll start talking, give some commentary, and then I'll be making sure that we go to the last section of part one of This Week in Bitcoin, where I'll be sharing with you what you can do with Bitcoin to make yourself great again, and then we'll cover part 2 and part 3. So Azad, let's start the video.
I'd ask that we dispense with the quorum call and I be recognized.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, usually public corruption happens in secret. The politicians that do it, they know it's wrong to accept money in exchange for favorable government treatment, and so they hide it until they're found out. A textbook example would be Louisiana Governor Edwin Edwards, who in the 1990s was quietly taking bribes from businessmen who wanted to get licenses for riverboat casinos. In the late 1990s, Edwards was convicted of the crimes of extortion, racketeering, money laundering. The way in which he was doing it was like out of a movie. In one instance, a businessman handed the governor a suitcase full of $100 bills totaling $400,000, all in order to get a 6-0 commission ruling in favor of this casino. Eventually, as with most all corrupt officials who are taking money privately, Edwards was discovered, he was disgraced, and he went to jail. As we speak, our president, Donald Trump, is going to the Middle East on a public corruption tour. He's no less corrupt than Edwin Edwards of Louisiana. In fact, he's way more corrupt. Edwin Edwards took $400,000. Well, in the Middle East, Donald Trump will cement deals totaling in the billions in exchange for favorable treatment by the U.S. federal government for these Gulf countries. The key difference is that Donald Trump isn't hiding it like other corrupt officials are. He's not ashamed. He's not doing it in secret. His corruption is wildly public. And his hope is that by doing it publicly, he can con the American people into thinking that it's not corruption because he's not hiding it. But what he's doing in reality is no different than any other corrupt public official who does it in private, other than the fact that Trump's corruption, his foreign policy corruption, is just so much bigger in scope and the impact that it has on the American people than anything a corrupt mayor or a corrupt governor may have done. Trump's first major foreign trip, and he just landed, is to Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and UAE. Not because these are our most important allies in the world, not because these are the most important countries in the world, not because he's going there to talk about making the Middle East more safe and more secure. No, his first trip is to these three countries because these are the three countries that have agreed to pay Donald Trump money. Donald Trump is going to collect tribute, and it's all just out in the open. Frankly, it's pretty easy to see this coming. Recent former presidents, Republicans and Democrats, have always very seriously and studiously avoided even the appearance of a conflict of interest. President Bush placed his assets into a qualified blind trust where investment decisions were made without his knowledge or input. Both Biden and Obama divested all of their assets except for cash and mutual funds. They didn't enter into any new business ventures while in the White House. In contrast, Trump has refused to abide by these standard ethics rules. His family runs his business, but nobody honestly believes that the kids are really in charge. President Trump is still calling the shots. His interests are not in a blind trust. He's made no pledge that he won't do new deals, even with foreign entities, while he's in office. In fact, he is doing deals seemingly every single week. He's open for business, and every foreign government knows it. In fact, it appears that right now the Gulf states are trying to outdo each other to up the price of buying an American president. And because Trump is greedy and he's insecure, he wants to fit in with the billionaire class, he is traveling to the region with his hat out for further solicitations. So let's ask, what is the going rate right now for a Gulf country to buy access to Donald Trump, to get favorable treatment?
Let's just give a bit of commentary there. So obviously there is, politics aside, this is the left trying to score points, the Democrats trying to score points over the Republicans. But let's face it, the entire system has been designed this way from the beginning. And so while you have these blind trusts are managed by those that receive money from the corporate interests, and politics is just simply a way of taking the Federal Reserve printed money that creates inflation, stealing it from the American people, and then using these blind trust organizations, NGOs, and non-governmental organizations, and organizations like USAID in order to launch covert operations that exist outside of Congress, outside of Senate, and probably has influence over the judicial. So while America, the Constitution, was created to protect Americans from the tyranny of government, which was the idea, it never protected against the tyranny of the corporations that are now a stateless power, that are global multinational institutions that are able to use the printing press of the Federal Reserve, use the proof of weapons network that I've always discussed, because the shareholders of the Federal Reserve are the banks. And those are global institutions. Those banks went public over time. As they went public, they were acquired by ETFs and fund managers and your pension and insurance premiums and money laundered via college endowments in order to change the curriculum. So where you have essentially doctors that are being taught how to be drug dealers, and you have economics students that are being taught how to be debt dealers for the banks. And having economic policies that just create Keynesian economics, and you become a debt dealer, as it were. And so through this system, you created a confiscation of wealth from the American people over to the corporate interests that receive all these corrupt contracts, and the politicians via lobby and via these blind trusts and NGOs are able to skim off money at the top. Now, as he quite rightly said, Trump is just doing it in the open. But this is what all the politicians are doing. And this is the confusion that people want you to have. They want you to believe this is democracy when it is a courtocracy. And the courtocracy is that they need you to be distracted, debating and trying to engage in the political process, when in reality, the only thing that matters is the profits of the corporations that control and install the politicians. As I've always called, I call it the proof of weapons network. And because that power has consolidated via investment banks like Goldman Sachs and JP Morgan into all these public companies, and the trillions of dollars of assets are now managed by organizations like BlackRock, then they actually, as global institutions, are able to use America, Europe, and UK as vassal states by securitizing every aspect of them, which they want to do with real world assets. And they want to securitize every aspect so that they can usher in this surveillance state. America's going to be done as a technocracy on stablecoins, as I've covered in the past. Europe's going to be done via central bank digital currencies. And artificial intelligence is the mechanism by which you can remove the whole economy. We are building decentralized artificial intelligence, and it's also ushering in a world which is becoming increasingly harder and harder to predict. So the whole economies are looking at hosting that artificial intelligence data in their country, which is why there are nuclear deals being done in the Middle East, which is why various Gulf countries have now got board seats within BlackRock, because they built sovereign wealth, because they received money that was extorted from the American people with their energy, as we have covered in previous broadcasts. If you watch the episodes on the multipolar world order, also watch the episodes where I covered Did America Sell Itself? You can watch many of those different if you fancy. Make sure you go to the Apple podcast and Spotify and follow Bitcoin Hard Talk there. And then you can go through some of these previous episodes, download them, watch them when you're at the gym or while you're driving or whatever. So you can catch up on those, because it's all important information for you to make yourself great again and catch up. Anyway, through this mechanism, there has always been this level of corruption, and that is through lobby power that you end up in this situation where our politicians just don't work for us. And so I'll go through, after we've done this clip, how you can engage in the process if you want to make a difference. But what he is exposing is out in the open with Trump in blind sight, exactly what they all do. And that's how politics works. So let's look at some of the individual deals, and then I'll tie it in to some of the crypto trends, and then we can go through the macro side and the geopolitical side of all the events that came in that I've been preparing you for. Azad, let's carry on where we left off.
For Qatar, we recently found out it's a $400 million luxury plane. This plane has been opulently configured for royal use. It's not a gift to the US government. It's a personal gift to the president. The terms of the arrangement apparently include a stipulation that after Trump leaves office, it will be transferred to Trump, to his presidential library, which means Trump gets the so-called floating palace for himself. This is outrageous. We've never seen anything like this before in American history. A foreign government gifting a $400 million luxury plane to the President of the United States. This is spelled out as blatantly unconstitutional by our founding fathers. They wrote into the Constitution a specific clause called the Emoluments Clause, which prohibits federal office holders from accepting gifts from any king, prince, or foreign state without the consent of Congress. Like, how much clearer could it be? It's unconstitutional. It's illegal. The founding fathers knew it was an evil to have members of Congress or the President of the United States accepting expensive gifts from a foreign nation who in exchange want favors from the US government. Donald Trump's acceptance of the luxury plane from a foreign monarch is basically the corruption that our founding fathers were seeking to prevent. But that's not all he's getting from Qatar. The Trump Organization recently signed a $5.5 billion golf course and real estate deal with Dar Global and Qatari Dar, a firm established by Qatar's sovereign wealth fund. $5.5 billion. While Trump's in office, it would have been unthinkable for any previous president to enter into a $5.5 billion business deal with anybody, never mind a foreign government, while they are in office, and it still should be unthinkable. Now, Qatar is a U.S. ally. It's a very important ally, but they're a complicated country. They have their own interests, some of which do not overlap with ours. A foreign government like Qatar should not have a $5 billion chit hanging over the head of a sitting U.S. president, and they should not be gifting him a $400 million plane. That should kind of go without saying. For Saudi Arabia, the price is also in the billions. Soon after leaving the White House, in Trump's first term, his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, created a private equity firm and got a $2 billion investment from Saudi Arabia. The board of the Saudi Sovereign Wealth Fund questioned whether this was smart to invest that much money in a totally unproven fund, but the Saudi Crown Prince himself overruled the board, undoubtedly seeing the political advantage of investing directly with the Trump family. But this was only the beginning. The Trump family has put things into overdrive during the second term. Within his first 3 weeks of office, Trump convened a meeting at the White House with the head of the Saudi Sovereign Wealth Fund, not to discuss matters of state, but to negotiate a deal between the PGA and the Saudi-backed LIV Golf Tour. You want to know why? To try to bring PGA tournaments back to Trump golf courses. Convene a meeting in the White House with the Saudis in order to enrich himself. In addition to the $5 billion Qatari real estate deal, the Trump Organization is also partnering with a Saudi firm on a $1 billion Trump-branded hotel and tower in Dubai. The property's website, this is like unbelievable. The property's website, this is a Trump-financed property along with a Saudi investment fund, offers free 10-year golden visas to the United States, hinting at the opportunity for investors in Trump's property to buy residency in the United States and a pathway to citizenship. For the UAE, the price is somewhere north of $2 billion. Last week, Eric Trump and World Liberty Financial co-founder Zach Witkoff spoke at a conference in Dubai on crypto called Token2049. As an aside here, it's just so fantastic and bone-chilling how transparent these guys are in their use of public positions to enrich themselves. I'm going to tell the story of Trump's stablecoin and the corruption with the Emiratis. But let's just pause for a second and consider the fact that the Trump family could have partnered with anybody in the world on their new crypto venture, World Liberty Financial. But of all the people in the world to partner with on this new crypto venture, they chose the son of Trump's Middle East envoy. Trump's Middle East envoy, the guy who's making all the decisions on U.S. policy in the Middle East, just to make it crystal clear to the Gulf countries that when they deal with World Liberty Financial, Trump's crypto venture, that they are dealing directly with the people responsible for making U.S. policy in the Middle East. It's just stunning. Literally.
Okay, let's pause there, and then we'll go through the construct.
Running a crypto.
Now, do you think he's been watching Bitcoin Hard Talk? Because if you remember, I've been covering this for months. Nobody was talking about the construct of World Liberty Financial. And then I also talked about the deep state connections and the operations like urban movers that were connected to those that got the Mossad agents that got arrested during the 9/11 bombings and everything that happened from there. You can go back to those episodes. I've been covering it all. And I told you that this one was coming, that Steve Witkoff would be negotiating deals in the Middle East. And he was the person that was there during Trump's second assassination attempt on the golf course. And he had deep, deep state connections. And now that it is his son that is part of World Liberty Financial, and then I shared the different types of constructs with stablecoin. Everyone called me a conspiracy theorist. And I said, these will be the tools and weapons that will be used. And this is how I got everybody ahead of all of the trends, by following the money and working through this early. Now, many people said, you are absolutely crazy. This will never happen. It is out of the world wild. But now I think it is happening, and you get months and months of head start. And that is what I do at Bitcoin Hard Talk. I always get you months and months and months ahead by following the money. I'm going to be doing that in a lot more of the sections. Now, this is really interesting because for those that have been watching previous episodes of Bitcoin Hard Talk, you'll know that I was building through the exact construct of this, understanding what tariff policies were. We'll do more of that in macro, but everyone else was thinking tariff policies were going to make America great again. And yet I was able to share exactly the real impacts and why it was, because I know that politicians are there to work for their corporate interest, and BlackRock portfolio companies, and BlackRock is investing in a multipolar world order, and therefore Trump was installed in order to achieve that. Now, people build these relationships with Trump and suddenly think that this is the first guy that's going to be able to break this, even though the proof of weapons network is the power structure that no politician can overcome. And so that is how we get everything ahead. And I hope those are the long-term listeners are starting to able to see this. Right, we're going to do the final part of the video. We're going to look at some of the crypto side. This ties it together into This Week in Bitcoin. And then we'll be doing part 2 on macro and geopolitics. So I said it's going to be a bit more extended in the Bitcoin section. Also, do me a favor, like, share, subscribe. If you're watching this for the first time, I'm trying to get to 100,000 subscribers. We're very close on YouTube. So please do that. And we can, because once we get to 100,000, I'll be able to get an additional review on the channel with the YouTube team. Okay, now let's look right into the depths. Token 2049, many years ago, I spoke at these events. I don't go to conferences anymore, but they were putting together this different types of information, which will help you understand how these deals are constructed, so you can make yourself great again, while Trump is not going to be making America great again, given who he works for. Okay, so let's go into the next part of the crypto deal.
Venture, and then going directly into the Middle East in order to find their first investment. And guess what? Miracle, they found it. MGX, an investment firm backed by the Emirati government at this conference, announced that they had looked at all the crypto companies in the world that they could partner with to invest $2 billion in the crypto exchange Binance, and they selected, wait for it, drum roll, the company run by the sons of the President of the United States and the U.S. Middle East envoy. $2 billion. Now, World Liberty's role in this transaction is not that complicated. It's kind of similar to a bank. MGX, this Emirati firm, deposits $2 billion with the firm, and in return receives the stablecoin to be used on these crypto exchanges. The firm holds on to these dollars, invests them, and keeps the profits for themselves. So the Trump-Witkoff company just gets basically a gift of capital. And if they just use that $2 billion to invest in treasury bonds, it would profit around $85 million a year from these investments alone. And the money goes directly to Trump, just directly to Trump. It's literally not complicated. Emiratis, World Liberty Financial, Donald Trump. This isn't 1990s Louisiana. Nobody's hiding it. On World Liberty's website, they say an entity affiliated with Donald J. Trump owns 60% of the equity in the company. And because of this deal, Trump and Witkoff can further capitalize, because Trump's stablecoin just became the fifth most valuable stablecoin in the world because of the Emirati investment. And if the plane and the real estate deals and the private equity fund investment and the stablecoin weren't enough for you, Trump has found one last way for Gulf money to flow seamlessly into his pocket. It's called the Trump meme coin. What's the business model here? Trump gets a huge payment whenever he releases a batch of these meme coins, which, by the way, have no underlying value other than just the demand that people have for Trump's coin. And then each time a Trump coin is bought or sold, a small fee is routed directly to the company owned by Trump. According to one analysis, nearly $325 million in fees have been accrued since the coin was launched in January. Just 3 months, 4 months, 4.5 months, $325 million worth of fees. Trump hides the buyers of the coin. In this way, the meme coin is kind of a little bit like Louisiana corruption. But we know that the majority of the buyers aren't Americans who want to help Trump make this nation great again. The majority of the buyers of Trump coin are super rich foreigners, princes, oligarchs, authoritarians, who are buying the coin in order to get in good with Trump or to get something in exchange. Now, one great thing about buying the coin is that you get access to Trump and the White House. And again, they're not hiding this. 2 weeks ago, Trump announced that he would host a private dinner at the White House with seats reserved for exclusively for the top 220 Trump coin holders. In 2 days since the announcement, Trump's company made $900,000 in fees because everybody, mostly foreigners, many of them probably in the Gulf, were buying up the coin as quickly as they could in order to get one of these seats. If a mayor of a small town was selling meetings at City Hall for $1,000, he would be run out of town on a rail. But that's exactly what Donald Trump is doing in the Middle East and all over the world, as foreign buyers line up to buy the meme coin, guaranteed private access to Donald Trump at the White House.
Okay, let's stop there. So that wouldn't be new to many of you that have been watching Bitcoin Hard Talk, because when you get to follow the money, and this is the very interesting thing about the nature of this new market. This is all on chain, and you get to see plausible, you don't get plausible deniability when you're doing this via the banking network. These are all transactions that will stay on chain forever. Essentially, the meme, I've always told people to avoid all the craziness, all the crypto scams. They are just mechanisms for trying to extract you out of what everyone really wants, which is Bitcoin. Bitcoin in self-custody is how you opt out of all this stuff. So anyway, you can start to see now. Also, remember, I also shared that who was the largest investor in World Liberty Financial? It was Justin Sun. Justin Sun, the guy that built a stablecoin, which is very questionable, that connected some of the old legacy exchanges in China, like Huobi and Poloniex, and that I believe there's holes in those exchanges. I can't prove it, but I think there was some creative tactics using. He was getting investigated by the SEC, and then suddenly, lo and behold, Justin Sun, his SEC case goes away. Now, I think there is genuine role for consumer protection in that construct, and we will find out whether that gets revealed. But I think eventually that whole thing will be. But essentially, this is how American politics works, and this is what I want people to understand. This is how I can predict. And people call me a conspiracy theorist because I talk about the proof of weapons network and the coordinations that large corporations, which I'll be covering more in the macro section and the geopolitical section. People think it's a conspiracy theory, but I can just simply follow what the corporations are doing in order to predict what the politicians are doing. And people just find that too wild to believe that it could actually be true. Well, I hope now you're starting to see the methodology, and everything that is happening right now is about building Trump family personal Bitcoin strategic reserves first, as well as Howard Lutnick Bitcoin strategic reserves first, as well as Steve Witkoff Bitcoin strategic reserves first. And I probably could go through more and more and more if I were to put the time into it. And what's happening to America's Bitcoin strategic reserves, we shall see. But my guess is they'll be lost, because this is a run-up to front run, and not financial advice, but I've been sharing ever since Bitcoin was $3 that eventually you would have a game theory event where all individuals, all corporations, all governments, and eventually central banks, they will all need to protect themselves with Bitcoin, as the debt-based fiat Ponzi scheme produces the inevitable, predictable, and guaranteed result that debt gets out of control, and they have to construct ever more elaborate ways of selling you their debt and making you the bag holder while their credit rating gets downgraded. In fact, I covered exactly that in the book that I wrote in 2011 and launched at the very first Bitcoin conference in Europe, Bank to the Future, Protect Your Future Before Governments Go Bust. And you are welcome to get a free copy and digital download of that if you don't want to buy it on Amazon by going to simondixon.com and signing up for free to the Bitcoin Hard Talk membership portal, where you can get many more resources. So my message to you is understand how the system works, then you can follow the money. And if you don't want to do it, each and every week, subscribe to my channel, follow me on Rumble in case it gets shut down, join me on the my podcast, and I'll do the work for you, because I've been doing it ever since Bitcoin was $3, so that you can make yourself great again. And hashtag me on X, MYGA, if you have any questions on this. So the West is owned by asset managers. Once you understand this, you can develop a strategy if you want to make your country great again. The currency is controlled by the banks, and the Federal Reserve, in the case of the US, the head, one of the parts of the proof of weapons network, is the one that controls the dollars. The banks get to create it, and that redistributes wealth into the asset managers. And then you can control governments through lobby power and corporate lobby power. And then you have the deep state in order to create the wars you want, and you become global. And global means you have no national interest in the country, and therefore politicians just become a way of extracting value from the people, which is why now you understand UK, now you understand Europe, and now you understand what is happening to America, because this was the same colonial techniques that Britain used, America used, Europe used in order to destabilize the Middle East, Africa, the global South. And now, because it's created this stateless global institution, it is being worked upon, it is being used upon its own countries, and people are able to protect themselves by opting out with Bitcoin. Anyway, presidents are just simply middle management. Real power comes from the central banks. And how do you boycott the central bank? You own Bitcoin, which was created in 2008 to resist against the corrupt central banking system. And real power, real corporate power, is consolidated in the asset managers, the largest of which is BlackRock, that also owns shares in Vanguard and State Street. And they are more important than politicians. So if you want to influence, stop messing around with politicians, because they don't work for you. They will only work for you if you pay them money. And if you pay the money, you have to be more economically powerful and a high net worth individual, which gets you membership to some of these proof of weapons network, which is what we saw at Bitcoin 2024 with the crypto lobby and the Bitcoin lobby and everything you have seen so far. So you are either in two positions. If you want to influence politics, you are either rich already, and the way that this has worked is you have to beat the proof of weapons network, which is designed to indebt and enslave anybody playing in fiat currencies. And so to play in the lobby game, you need to be wealthy. To become wealthy, the best way I know is own more Bitcoin this month than the previous month. And everybody that has done that for a minimum of 4 years in a cycle will review and see they beat every single player of the proof of weapons network. Every public company, every hedge fund, gold, real estate, every asset. I can't promise it will happen again, but I've been saying it will happen ever since $3 and every cycle. And then you are able to boycott the Federal Reserve as well. Now, if you want to change, rather than going after the politicians, now that we have this kind of Dutch East India Company like BlackRock that exists, that is way more powerful than government, they do listen when you can coordinate together and pool your money. So where you spend your money is how you boycott. You boycott the Federal Reserve and you make yourself great again at the same time by saving in Bitcoin and avoiding these dollar proxy derivatives leveraged debt that everyone at Bitcoin2025 was trying to pitch you into so they can make themselves great again at the expense of everybody else. You don't do it via shares. You don't do it via borrowing against your Bitcoin. You do it by a good old-fashioned way. Own more Bitcoin this month than the previous month. And once you become economically powerful by beating the game, if you want, you can participate in lobbies. Now, if you are not rich, then you can't participate in lobbies. How do you influence? That's where the collective boycotting and you deciding how you spend your money is how you control the process, because governments don't care unless you're rich. And so therefore, the only way to influence the corporations is to boycott and collectively pool your money and decide where you're going to spend your money. That's where pressure works. As we saw during some of the boycotts, that it impacted share price, and therefore you get changes. And that's why I love Bitcoin, because it makes you more economically powerful by adopting better habits, the reverse of what they ask you to do, so that you can become powerful enough to join the lobby and influence the proof of weapons network from the inside. And you get to boycott the head of the snake, which is the banking system, and that's how you win. And then you can you can actually control where your money is spent, and then you can spend local. You cannot take on debt, and that's how we take down the system. And even if collectively that doesn't impact that, you get to free yourself in an alternative financial system. You can boycott BlackRock by owning it in self-custody rather than allowing them to protect themselves so that they can reset the world order in the way that they want. That's how real change happens. And that's why I want you to use Bitcoin to make yourself great again. Now we're going to move over to part 2, where we're going to be digging deeper into everything that happened this week in macro, the taco trade, and everything you need to know before we cover part 3, this week in geopolitics. So just before we go into part 2, do me a favor, like, share, subscribe, hit the bell symbol, hit all. You'll get a notification from YouTube. Go over to Rumble, follow me over there in case I get shut down from YouTube when they do that review. Once I hit 100K subscribers, I think we'll be okay. And if not, we back everything up on simondixon.com. So make sure you've got a free login to the Bitcoin Hard Talk membership portal. And if you want real-time updates every single day, then I'm on X as well. So follow me on X. And I would like you to do me a favor to help the algorithms, put a little comment below this video, or like and share it with your family. I'm going to get a bit more water. Then we're going to go into Bitcoin Hard Talk, episode 83. Make yourself great again, part 2, this week in macro. Okay, welcome to Bitcoin Hard Talk, episode 83. Make yourself great again, this week in macro. I went through some of the trends this week in Bitcoin from Bitcoin2025 and some of the wild trades that are happening with stablecoins and how you can make yourself great again and engage in what really makes a difference. You can go back to that. If you haven't watched it, we break it up into 3 parts. This is part 2, where I'm going to be going through and continuing on This Week in Macro. Now, to tie the Bitcoin conversation with the gold conversation, with the macro conversation, you'll notice that Bitcoin ETF inflows over the last month have overtaken gold over the last 5 weeks. So with gold, there has been outflows. With Bitcoin, there has been inflows. So it's becoming really clear that people are protecting themselves, as well as BlackRock's clients, which are the high net worth individuals and the institutions. They are protecting this transition to a multipolar world using the Bitcoin ETF. You can use Bitcoin itself. And while central banks are using gold in the longer term trend, you can see there is a de-dollarization of treasuries and dollar denominated assets as reserves, and an increase in gold over time. Central banks don't have the regulations in order to do it with Bitcoin yet. We're starting to see Czech Republic as the first central bank that's looking to protect the central bank's balance sheet with Bitcoin. And the Bank for International Settlements is releasing guidance that will come out and come into force maybe next year as well. So you get to front run all of that as well. But Bitcoin, $9 billion of inflows over the last 5 weeks, whereas gold has been a $2.8 billion of inflows. And I believe we are in, if you've watched all my previous videos, BlackRock strategy of a destabilization campaign within America, and everything is continuing as we see this. Essentially, if you've watched previous episodes, very quick summary, I said that China has already won the trade war. BlackRock has been investing in a peaceful Middle East and a BRICS multipolar world. The technology behind America becoming a technocracy and sacrificing Europe and UK to the proof of weapons network so they can extract more and asset strip more, and push it towards a surveillance state with a central bank digital currency in Europe and a stablecoin technocracy within America. And so I've been sharing how BlackRock wants a multipolar world order that I've been covering. And we can see that as Trump, who was installed to put tariff policies in, which is the perfect way of getting to that multipolar world order and strategically having capital outflows from America, I said the key indicators to look at is the interest on the 10 and 30-year bonds, the yield on the 10 and 30-year bonds. Now, they went slightly lower to just below 4.5% for the 10-year bond, which is the price that America needs to pay in order to refinance its debt with a 10-year bond. And with a 30-year bond, it's got to pay just under 5% at the moment. The current debt, the $37 trillion of debt that America has right now, is an average rate that they're paying of 3.3%. So even if you get the Federal Reserve to lower rates on short-term bills like 3 months bonds and 6 months bonds and shorter dated bonds, you're going to have to pay a higher rate anyway, no matter what you manage to get the Fed to do with interest rates. So what is Trump doing? Well, Trump's really, as we move into this $10 trillion refinancing of the US debt, they beta tested a 20-year bond, which is a weird bond. Most people either invest in short-term bills or 10 years or 30 years, but they beta tested an auction on the 20-year bond, and the demand was low, and the rates on the longer-term, yield on the longer-term bonds went up, and it started to, combined with the tariff policy, take those that own the most amount of US treasuries and US bonds, i.e. countries like Japan, and it made them sell their bonds so that you can essentially take those treasuries, sell them for dollars, and then sell those dollars to buy local currency, Japanese won. And then that pushes up the price of those currency when traded against the dollar. So the dollar goes down relative to the won. You sell those assets, the yield on the longer term bonds, the 10-year and 30-year, go up, and you end up with capital outflow out of America, and Japan becoming, focusing on their own economy, and things starting to break because people use Japan and the Bank of Japan to get 0% interest loads, hedge out the currency risk, and invest it in the US stock market. So we're seeing part of the reversal of those trends. And so now Japan is selling bonds rather than buying bonds. And we're starting to see that the same trend in the euro, in other currencies, in China. And you're starting to see this strategic, controlled demolition of the US as the global hegemon, while Trump says he's coming after deep state, and you have Elon there, and they take away all of the constructs that propped up the dollar, i.e. USAID, through covert wars and all those types of things. You deconstruct it, and you get this resetting of the world order while Trump invests in the same places the BlackRock's investing in. So follow their money, and you're able to get indications into it. And as I covered in part one, stablecoin issuers like Trump, like World Liberty Financial with Steve Witkoff, like Tether with Cantor Fitzgerald, they benefit the higher those yields are, because then they can issue a stablecoin and you can enter into this radical monetary reform that I've been speculating we might enter into way before Trump was elected as well. And so in reaction to that, Trump this week met with the Fed chairman, Jerome Powell. And Jerome Powell is middle management. He doesn't control the Fed. The shareholders of the Federal Reserve control the Fed, which is the banks that get to influence policy of FOMC, the Open Market Committee. And then they do what's in the best interest of the BlackRock portfolio companies and State Street and Vanguard that are all public companies with significant shareholders as well. And so he had a meeting at the White House. The net outcome was not surprise, is the narrative that he needs to feed to the MAGA people that don't watch Bitcoin Hard Talk, that thinks Trump is taking on the Fed and he's going to lower rates so he can refinance the debt at a lower rate, not knowing that it's the 10-year and the 30-year that matters, because you can't refinance the debt on the short-term bills, which is what caused this problem in the first place. And so Trump came out and he made an announcement telling Jerome Powell that the Fed is making a mistake on interest rates. Because what would happen if the Fed did lower interest rates? It would have the opposite effect. It would push up the rates of the 10-year and 30-year treasuries, which would benefit the stablecoin issuers, mean that if you want to refinance the debt, it will cost more. And so monetary policy is becoming rendered ineffective, and they're moving to fiscal policy. And rather than reform money, they're doing tax reform, which only, as I've always said, creates distortions with tariffs, but it doesn't solve the problem. You can't solve a monetary reform problem with tax reform like tariffs, which is what drew me to the conclusion where everybody was confused. Right in the beginning, I was able to say this will make massive bankruptcies within American companies. They'll be acquired by the large corporations and the BlackRock portfolio companies. It will reset the world order where the countries that rely on exports work with China to make up for the 10% that they export to America. It will strategically weaken America. There will be a global recession, which everyone will be impacted by, but it will draw everyone closer to BRICS, and the large corporations run by BlackRock that use America as a vassal state and Trump as a vassal policy to reset the portfolio. The export-driven countries will have companies that go bust, and they'll be consolidated up to the BlackRock portfolio companies. It will implement into a trade war that's not about rebuilding the manufacturing base. It's about building AI and robotics, and it won't create jobs, because that's the only way this technocracy can compete with the manufacturing base in China. And it will benefit, it will be a confiscation, just like the C-19 event that happened in 2000. that redistributed wealth from Main Street to BlackRock portfolio companies. So it is part of the destabilization campaign to maximize profits. We also had more as well, where the Supreme Court, they came out and said that the members of the Federal Reserve, they are prohibited against removal. And so, this is kind of Trump's narrative of whether he thinks he can take on the Federal Reserve. They're on the same team. They work for the same people. There was also a new ruling that the Trump administration's basically exceeded its authority in imposing worldwide and retaliatory tariffs under the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, or it's called IEFPA. And so this was to create a new pump in the stock market. Everybody's like, the tariffs aren't happening. We can get back to the proof of weapons network, debt-based Ponzi scheme. We can make sure that the majority of Americans don't benefit, but at least I get to retire and my stocks and real estate continue to go up again. And then suddenly it's met with the US Appeals Court. They reinstate President Trump's tariffs. Those businesses that were like, do I get a refund? Do I trade? They go into stealth mode. Then it comes back and no one knows how to do business. And this is the predictable, guaranteed, and inevitable. And, you just got to follow the money rather than listening to the narratives. Now, Trump came out and created another destabilization campaign. Last week, I said that he said 50% tariffs on Europe. And then he came out and said that he agrees to delay the 50% tariffs on Europe, not from July the 1st, which is next week, to July the 9th. Again, this is about creating wild swings in market, making America an unpredictable place to do business with, and resetting the world order to this multipolar world order. Trump essentially works for the GCC bloc and BRICS and is doing a great job for BlackRock's portfolio companies because they partnered with them as well. We also had Elon Musk coming out and saying that he's left the Trump administration role. The reason and the catalyst for that is because, remember what I said way before Elon even joined? I said, you can't pay off the twin deficit, the fiscal deficit, and the fiscal, the trade imbalance, without weakening the dollar and no longer being the world reserve currency in the case of the trade side. And on the fiscal side, it creates a Great Depression because every dollar is debt. You can't pay down debt. That's $37 trillion of the money supply that needs to be there because it's a debt-based Ponzi scheme. So you have to have monetary reform before you can have paying down the debt. And so he thought that he was paying down the debt. It didn't work. And eventually, all that happened is the data was extracted to artificial intelligence. USAID and various organizations were shut down, which loses US soft power. Suddenly, Trump comes out and leads, I covered it last week, the big, beautiful bill. And I covered how it helps the military-industrial complex, kicks off the next phase of wealth extraction from the American people to kick off the space Cold War. You can covered all of that last week. Gets tax cuts at the top, but it was essentially a big increase in spending. And so Elon's like, well, what am I doing? Whether it's theatrics or whether he's upset, there's meant to be a meeting with Elon and Trump at the White House today. But the idea is more volatility because Elon came out and said, you can't have a big bill and a beautiful bill. You can have a big bill, you can have a beautiful bill, but you can't have both. Well, if you are a monetary reformer and you've been watching Bitcoin Hard Talk, you'll know that this Ponzi scheme has to continue unless you want to reset the world order and do currency reform as well, which is what we'll always be doing. But anyway, more volatility, more division, and companies deciding, do I get a refund on my tariff? Do I do not? All business uncertainty. And so small business bankruptcies will follow. And this will lead to the ones that survive having higher prices because they got to factor in the imports because China does not need America. America needs China. And I broke that down in the episode of Bitcoin Hard Talk where I did, it's not US versus China, it's BlackRock versus the world. Anyway, now I want to cover the things that are actually happening that they're probably not covering you if you just watch, social media or Western media. There was a massive conference that had really significant implications, and it had zero coverage in the West. So you probably never even heard about it because it doesn't get any coverage. And it is a big deal. And it's not really a surprise to Bitcoin Hard Talk people. But essentially, it was China, the countries of Southeast Asia, otherwise known as ASEAN, the Southeast Asia countries, and the Arab states through the Gulf Cooperation Council, the GCC. So this is where I said all the power is shifting to in terms of the growth, the capital outflows from BlackRock ETFs, the repatriation of capital. And they basically held a summit in Kuala Lumpur in Malaysia. And it just didn't get any coverage because they don't want you to know the message, because the message is just obvious in terms of the BlackRock portfolio company agenda and the multipolar world order that I've been sharing with you. But it confirms what I said, those impact would be of tariffs. Basically, those blocks could become the largest blocks working together. I've said that the reason that we had the tariff policy is because GCC and BRICS aligned. Now we've got ASEAN and the GCC and China becoming essentially an economic bloc of agreement. So what was agreed at this? Well, firstly, it was to develop completely free trade between China, the ASEAN countries, and the Gulf Cooperation Council. So there's going to be free trade amongst those. There's also going to be a de-dollarization, which doesn't mean that it basically means they trade between each other in barter networks, which was the BRICS mission. And you can do it in your local currencies rather than doing it in the dollar. So in case you get weaponized by sanctions, you can still trade. And this was the idea behind BRICS. While everyone was saying they're not going to launch a currency, it can't compete with the dollar, they were saying they don't even get in with each other. Well, they've already showed that countries that were previously sanctioned are able to trade with each other. They built alternative payment rails for CBDCs, as well as local legacy fiat currencies, as well as using public blockchains, Bitcoin, stablecoins, and even Ethereum in some cases as well, to essentially de-dollarize and explore how they can do cooperation with local currencies and cross-border payments. And so this is all the things, the inevitable, predictable result. It was also a commitment by these countries to explore Belt and Road connectivity, which is where essentially BRICS, led by China, is controlling some of the ports, working and investing with countries in order to build up their manufacturing side, buy products from China. And then the African countries, as I covered in the South Africa episode, they're saying, well, we would like to use our leverage to build the final product here and employ people here. And obviously BlackRock has invested in that vision to have ultra high growth by the BRICS countries investing in the global South alongside the GCC. There was also a initiative to, between the countries, have seamless connectivity, including the development of logistics controls and digital platforms to make that seamless, using, I guess, these different types of real-world assets and different types of trade products that are being built as well. They also want to develop a cross-regional digital economy framework, including artificial intelligence. Now, remember in part one, I covered the deals that Trump did. It was immediately followed with NVIDIA selling chips to the UAE, building data centers and controlling some of that artificial intelligence, and energy deals so that you can plug it in with nuclear energy, which is how you power all this artificial intelligence, and you can do Bitcoin mining at significantly cheaper rates, so they can build their sovereign reserves and play those energy plays using nuclear markets as well. And so they're exploring how they can do energy market collaboration by plugging these networks together with 2 billion people, 30% of the world's gross domestic product, and 50% of the world's GDP growth by using purchasing power parity. PPP is an alternative to GDP. GDP. Basically, it factors in currency devaluations to try and factor that out of the equation by factoring in the cost of living. And so if you have a significantly lower cost of living, but a higher GDP, then PPP effectively corrects that. And by measuring with PPP, China is already significantly a larger economy than America when you factor this in. And so 55% of global PPP is factored into these corridors and connectivity. So this feeds into my thesis that essentially Trump, a proxy of BlackRock invested in BRICS and GCC and technocracy in US. Trump is helping China, and even I can show you an example of one deal. This is just crystal clear when you follow, and rather than doing it with crypto side, you can look at some of the macro side. There was a deal where essentially China now has seized one of the most strategic assets in Syria, which is strategically important to the GCC, one of their ports. And if you look at all these ports, it is Trump negotiating. He's saying we're getting great deals for America, but it's negotiations between BlackRock, China, and the GCC countries. That's all that they're doing. Sovereign wealth for GCC, sovereign wealth for China and BRICS, and corporate wealth for BlackRock and the Proof of Weapons Network, which is being weaponized against the people at the moment. This is why I want you to understand these trends so you can protect yourself. Well, anyway, one of the most strategic ports is in Syria. I mean, this has just been a human tragedy of proxies, Western proxies like ISIS and Al-Qaeda fighting Qatari, Iranian, Turkish proxies. I've covered it many times in the geopolitical side. We won't rehash it right now. But Turkey, did a regime change, and you've got new leadership, and then a series of deals that happened before and after that. But through that port, essentially, there was a 30-year deal that was signed between China and that port via a French company. So on May the 1st, there was headlines that said a French giant, which was taking over Syria's port of Latakia. The company was called CMA CGM, and it is basically French in name only, because in 2013, China basically dropped about $400 million for a 49% stake in CMA's terminals and various other ports that it invests in. And then later did another $1 billion loan through the Belt and Road Initiative asset so that it could rebuild. Now, Belt and Road is popular because it doesn't do what the IMF model of covert regime change, forever wars, overthrowing your government, installing a puppet government to privatize all the resources and then sell them to the corporations, or and BlackRock ends up managing them through ETFs. They don't change the model that your country has, so it's popular with people. But CMA CGM basically signed a 30-year deal to run, expand, and modernize the port of Latakia. There was a $320 million investment, and there's going to be a new deep water quay that's built as well. It's a 40% revenue split between the government of Syria and the corporation. Syria gets 60%, CMA gets 40%, and China essentially through CMA gets the control of the port and strategic control, which is exactly the model that the IMF did, but this time doing it without the regime changes. So essentially, this is the model that's being exerted. Now, normally you would expect US to be pushing against that if you believe the MAGA narrative. But we are seeing that US is strategically exiting these regions because, as I said, the things that I've been covering with the GCC and BRICS trade as well. So 2 weeks after this deal was done, Trump visited the Middle East. He visited Saudi. He visited Qatar. He visited UAE. I covered the Saudi Arabia talk in previous episodes. And immediately, Trump reverses his policy on Syria. So this is another example of how Trump is negotiating for BlackRock portfolio companies. The portfolio companies are working with the GCC. The GCC has now board members on BlackRock, and they get to invest in this new peaceful structure. And this is how I know, when we cover the geopolitical section, that we're not in the neocon model of forever wars. And so I can project that forward into seeing whether narratives make sense or not. But essentially, by lifting the sanctions and doing exactly what Trump did, he is helping China's investments. And then strategically exiting, allowing for the peaceful deal. Of course, Trump is doing deals on the side. And some of those financing of the deals, like the Trump Towers in Qatar, UAE, Saudi, some of them are funded by ICBC. ICBC is the largest bank in China. So follow the money. Don't believe the narrative. And you can make yourself great again rather than doing the fake version and believing the politicians are going to do it for you. So immediately Trump comes out and he lifts sanctions. So that now allows for all the growth in the region. And he calls for the former Al-Qaeda leader in charge. He says that he's a handsome man and all the things that happened. And now Latakia is part of China's expanding deals with the GCC, with BRICS. And Reuters came out afterwards and reported that the new government will stop printing currency in Russia. So it's local currency. It's not going to be, it was printing as local currency in Russia. And instead it's going to be doing it in Germany and the UAE. And so you can imagine what types of deals. Maybe BlackRock has more power because it has strategically weakened Germany. So Germany is a vassal state for BlackRock, UAE a part of the GCC bloc. And you can see how these power negotiations work in the real world. And UAE is essentially becoming a place for currency experiments. It is also creating through Abu Dhabi, a crypto-friendly environment, and is going to have a tax-neutral zone. So when America launches these stable coins, BlackRock launches these tokenized assets, they can go globally, and these regions can invest in AI. They can use energy. They can use it to power proof-of-stake networks which can host stable coins. And then they can use it to also mine some Bitcoin as well. So you can see how everything is transitioning to this world of Bitcoin, AI, and CBDCs. And all you need to do is follow the money as well. Dubai Ports, which is a company, they signed an $800 million investment deal in Tartus port in Syria as well. So essentially Russia, China, UAE, alongside the GCC, they go effective and strategic control. It's better to be controlled by your neighbors. And this is all part of the US exit, which is why tariff policies happened in the first place, which is why Trump was installed as well. These were why in previous videos, when I covered like the India-Pakistan war, I was able to say, follow the money. You can see what this is happening and I were following some of the deals that are being done in outposts within Pakistan, within Sri Lanka, and the fact that China's got like these 90-year leases as well. So anyway, that's how you can understand when you follow the money, you get a different picture. And why I want you to make yourself great again. I want you to always follow the money and make sure you like and subscribe, because BlackRock is turning US into a regional technocracy. And it is doing deals with its own portfolio company, and the Trump administration and Trump is essentially negotiating all those deals for them. And by ending sanctions, this just helps push that through. And that's why I believe that we're going to actually see an Iran nuclear deal as well, because it was China that negotiated a normalization between Saudi Arabia and Iran, and this is just the execution. So if you're watching Bitcoin Hard Talk, you're ahead of this. And that's why my theory is that the Trump tariffs are not a trade war. It was an execution of BlackRock strategy via Trump, simply because the trade war was already won, and there were all those proxy wars that we've been talking about as well. And this brings us into why I believe that the ceasefire that was just announced by the Trump administration, that was negotiated directly between Hamas and America, I think this is the real deal that I have been sharing, even though for 100 years it's all been fugazi negotiations in order to justify how they can steal trillions of dollars of profits from the American people over to the military industrial complex, create inflation so you can spend the bill, and quite frankly, commit crimes against humanity through these endless forever wars, which are never meant to end. They're just meant to make a lot of money for those that profit from it. So if you enjoyed This Week in Macro, we have part 3. The final part is This Week in Geopolitics. And This Week in Geopolitics, I'm going to be covering, by following the money, why I think what will come next in the game theory between the announcement of the ceasefire and the ongoing Iran nuclear deal that is being negotiated. So do me a favor, if you're enjoying this, please like, share, subscribe. If you're watching the broken up version, then you can watch part 3, where I'll be going over This Week in Geopolitics. I'm going to take a little bit of water. Please, if you're not a subscriber, subscribe to the channel. If you're not a free member of the Bitcoin Hard Talk membership portal, go over to simondixon.com, register yourself. If you're not following me on Rumble, in case YouTube gets shut down, please do that. If you want real-time updates, follow me on X. And if you would like to download this and watch it in leisure when you're working out or driving with no extra time, then go to Apple Podcast, download Bitcoin Hard Talk, and do the same on Spotify if you're an Android user or you prefer that. And then we're going to go through the final section of Bitcoin Hard Talk, episode 83. This week in Bitcoin, the Gaza ceasefire and the Iran nuclear deal and the game theory behind it. Okay, welcome to Bitcoin Hard Talk, episode 83, part 3, This Week in Geopolitics, where I'm going to be covering the Gaza ceasefire and the Iran nuclear deal, the game theory of what I think will be coming next, so that you can prepare yourself. And aside from the sheer disaster of this humanitarian crisis that for over 600 days we've had to watch, crimes against humanity, words that I don't want to say on YouTube, but the humanitarian disaster has been absolutely unbearable, and there is no excuses right now. But I was predicting that there would be strategic escalation where everything would get worse in order to de-escalate an announcement of a ceasefire and a deal that does actually happen, because essentially the GCC, through this multipolar world order, has been buying a decolonization exercise away from America in the region by partnering with BRICS as a result of the China normalization deal. So just a quick recap, if you're new to this, Trump and the US are essentially, I covered this in part 1 and 2, functioning as proxies for the proof of weapons network, with BlackRock as the CEO and BlackRock's portfolio companies. They are not dependent actors doing what's right for America first, because through securitization, the stateless entity is way, way more important than government, and they use lobby in order to install politicians. BlackRock is no longer betting on a US unipolar dominated US world. It is betting on a multipolar world order that I've covered. And it has been investing in peace within the Middle East. It has been saying the military companies have been exiting. The finance companies have been doing a deal. GCC has been going through building its sovereign wealth in order to compete with America, decolonize, normalize with Israel, and commit to a free Palestine and a Palestinian state, where it's now built enough economic power, and America has been strategically weakened, where GCC can negotiate with BlackRock and BRICS, which China has kept its sovereign by not having a debt-based Ponzi scheme central bank, which means that large corporations don't end up with all the strategic power. It's managed to keep its sovereignty. And so you've had this new power regions and the splitting up the world into blocks, and covered in the macro section, the ASEAN blocks and the various other blocks anyway. But BlackRock is investing in a GCC and BRICS-led multipolar world order. And the types of deals that you can see on the geopolitical section and how it ties together is that you saw an announcement this week from Spain as it actually halts all arms sales to Israel. They halted completely. It bans Israel, basically Israel-bound weapons, and any of the ships, that were containing weapons. They are banned from using any of their within Spain. And it called for a global recognition of a Palestinian state. Now, what happened on the same week? Well, on the same week, if you were following it, Spain and Saudi signed 4 major investment deals in Riyadh, the capital of Saudi. And so this was just after Trump's meeting with Saudi, UAE, and Qatar, where they were putting together all the deals to discuss tech, energy, AI, military, crypto investments. And so this is an example of how I believe GCC has been buying decolonization. So now Europe, vassal state of BlackRock and its portfolio companies, now has to change their narrative. You started to see more and more from the BBC calling out. BBC started releasing documentaries that were created ages ago on how settler colonialism was happening in the West Bank. And suddenly you get this big shift in narrative. UK Parliament comes out and says that the humanitarian crisis is unbearable, that Israel was weaponizing starvation. This was already done throughout the whole thing. There were campaigns where I was shouting as loud as I could, either on X Spaces or Bitcoin Hard Talk, that they're weaponizing starvation. And then you had all the people that were saying, no, that's not happening. And, all of the stuff that we've been put through. And now suddenly they say it's happening. And that's what makes me believe that Israel is being strategically weakened, as I covered as well. Now, what happened? UAE showing that it is more important than Israel power at the moment. The UAE summoned the Israeli ambassador over provocative practices that were happening in Jerusalem. Basically, this is when the radical Zionists are doing things in Al-Aqsa Mosque, a site that is important to both the Jewish faith and the Muslim faith. And so UAE is able to summon, which is strategic, showing that Israel is being strategically and economically weakened, and the balance of power is changing. And normally I wouldn't believe it if it weren't for the fact that US is strategically retreating. It's got its debt issue, and it has handed over power to BlackRock, essentially. And now Trump is able to come out and exert influence over Netanyahu, so America can have plausible deniability, say all that genocide, that was Israel, it wasn't us. It wasn't us representing the military companies that made trillions of dollars of revenue from it. And now Trump came out publicly and said that he does not want Netanyahu to bomb Iran. And he's told him that it won't be appropriate because they're negotiating a nuclear deal. So how was I able to take this seriously? What was I able to? Well, I've covered it in previous episodes. But now let's go through what I think comes next by covering the global game theory. The way that I do this as well in predicting geopolitics is ideology, doesn't have the same impact unless it is combined with power. But ideology tends to be weaponized for power, which is represented by money. And when they're public companies, this is for profits. And so if you look at BlackRock in general, not a perfect science, there's a game theory guy that I follow on Twitter, Evan X. And we have similar thoughts on how we think about this. I call it the proof of weapons network with BlackRock as CEO. But when you split BlackRock up into the different factions, you can understand how this works. So they're mainly financial companies, military companies, consumer and pharma. These are very important lobbies, and tech companies. Now, normally these factions, they prefer to actually work together in tandem. And BlackRock, which is an asset manager controlling all the endowment funds and various other things, they can kind of use their technology to push out and influence policy in this stateless, decentralized network that I call the proof of weapons network. But they can collude in this stateless network in order to maximize profit, sacrifice profit from one, and play these games where they can use a hedge fund to short stock in the company that is being sacrificed. So they make profit as profits go down. And you can maximize through the technology and vast technology that BlackRock has built. Basically, that profit can be used to become more important than any state, as I've always said. But it's not always the case that they are on the same page. And so sometimes they may move against each other, and they hedge each other strategically as well when that happens. But because one faction may, for example, hold US foreign policy. So the military industrial complex may be a higher lobby for, US foreign policy. And that was the neocon strategy. Biden was in the neocon camp, a continuation of Obama and Bush, where essentially it was create narratives, false flag operations via proxy Israel, false flag operations like 9/11, where intelligence agencies create these crimes against humanity, radicalize people into justifying it through religion, and then go and do another war that profits the military industrial complex, justifies civil unrest and changing laws like Patriot Act, justifies the money printing, and then that all being siphoned off against the American people. And then you can use these covert operations like the deep state, like the IMF, in order to vassalize those states, force them into dollar dependency, and then you can control their economies through controlling financial capital, doing colored revolutions, overthrowing their governments. And that's why many people joined BRICS in the first place, because they don't want that to happen to them anymore. But at one state, the military industrial complex could be the leader in influencing US foreign policy. And that's how it used to be under Biden. And that's why we had strategic escalation over multiple parties into sacrificing Europe and everything I've covered with the Ukraine-Russia war as well. But at the moment, in the case of the Middle East, the financial industrial complex is the winner. That could be asset managers, it could be investment banks that split these companies up into products. It could be the retail banks that get to create the money from the central banks that influences monetary policy to optimize for the financial industrial complex, as it were. And Trump is just essentially the deal maker because the finance and the banks are in charge at the moment. And so now I believe that there was a battle between military and financial, and finance has won. And finance, in the case of the Middle East, is dictating the policy. And they have said that they're going to be peace and prosperity in the Middle East. So suddenly, all these militia groups like ISIS just disappear, which were funded by the West in the first place as destabilization campaigns. And you get regime changes, power structures, escalate to de-escalate. And the biggest change that we are seeing in the Middle East that I've been covering in the geopolitical section. Now, during this transition, there could be moves from the financial interests against the military interest. And that might be some of the things that you're seeing. They want to drop as many bombs as possible, make sure that they get a little bit more power in terms of the negotiations with Lebanon and the future structures. And we don't know the exact games, but you can see that these games are being played. But remember, the finance and the asset managers, they own shares in the military companies. So they all benefit together and they can optimize through these different types of algorithms. Aladdin's technology at BlackRock is the most sophisticated artificial intelligence technology that even the Federal Reserve uses for monetary policy, and Treasury uses for fiscal policy, as well as all the money managers and endowment funds and money and everything as well. And as well as using it for itself as well to optimize the profits as well. So Netanyahu at the moment, he was kind of the military industrial complex guy. He can create carnage. He was negotiating his own deal. The financial, the finance and the bank, I believe that, was working with Trump and US, and those interests were no longer aligned, but were kind of connected via the different interests in BlackRock as well. But now the military industrial complex, I believe, has completely moved on. This is how I was able to say that there will be escalate to de-escalate, drop all the final bombs, profit from the genocide. Again, remember, I'm talking about monetary flows here. This isn't the humanitarian side. They have no care for the humanitarian side. They have no care about this. They're willing to do it. They've been doing it for decades and decades and decades. This is just the first time we've had to watch it on camera. And we've debunked it, and we've been able to see all the lies, and there's been the alternative media to perpetuate because Telegram was funded through Bitcoin donations, and WikiLeaks was funded by Bitcoin donations, and X moved to a new model of freedom of speech, but not freedom of reach, where you could, rather than censor you could say everything, and then they use that to censor your reach instead. And then they can use that for their social credit scores and the technocracy and stablecoins that I covered in This Week in Bitcoin and This Week in Macro. Well, anyway, Netanyahu, I believe, has essentially decoupled from the state, and his interests are all about personal survival. And so BlackRock is entirely aligned with the Gulf Cooperation Council, the rebuild plan that was set up by Egypt, entirely aligned with a Palestinian state, and economically weakening Israel so that deals can be done. It can be purchased in distress over time. And so even if it expands its settlements, they're all going to be effectively not under the control of US via its proxy, via its military industrial complex. There is going to be a recognition of a new power structure, and neighbors would much rather have peace. And so BlackRock and all of them are in line now with Palestine being free rather than the old model. And so Netanyahu's just been looking for his deal, secure his own survival because he's on charge of corruption charges. He's in a position where Smoldrich and his other members of the cabinet have been admitting that they want to eliminate all Palestinians. Piers Morgan comes out and says, yeah, they have genocidal intent. The court has already ruled. The narrative has already changed in the proof of weapons network. And so I was able to successfully predict that I think this ceasefire is different, and the ceasefire was announced. And so I don't know exactly what the deal looks like at the moment, but I believe that what comes next is the strategic removal of Netanyahu, the cabinet, and regime change within Israel, while they try to keep the narrative of distancing Israel's actions from America's actions and the corporations and throwing Israel under the bus. This was no surprise to Bitcoin Hard Talk listeners as well. So it was announced this week by the White House that Israel has signed off on the US ceasefire proposed for Gaza, and Hamas had already agreed to it. And we already knew the terms in it because it was what they already did in the beginning. Hamas already said that they were willing to step aside. Hamas already said that they were willing to hand over the hostages, but they wanted the Palestinian hostages in return, which is what the operation was in the first place. And then they lied about everything using atrocity propaganda. Look up my blog on simondixon.com. Look up Atrocity Inc. And you can see all the lies about the sexual violence and beheaded babies, none of which happened. They're basically what I'm forecasting here by following the money, and I'll tell you if it changes, is the gradual evolution of Witkoff, what they will call Witkoff's ceasefire plan, which only happened because of the normalization between Saudi Arabia and Iran because of China. But obviously, America gets to take credit because they're exiting, and they need to paint a MAGA narrative on top of it because they're no longer global hegemon and they can't do these covert wars anymore. So if you need a narrative of an Israel regime change, at the same time, you need a Hamas regime change narrative as well. And so I think you'll see that narrative, but it will be in cooperation with the regions, with Hamas funders, which is Qatar. Qatar is an ally of US. They have a foreign base there. And in cooperation with an Iran nuclear deal, because Iran needs these sanctions to go, because they've been trying to regime change Iran by weakening and turn Iran into Syria, which was the neocon model. But now the neocon model is no longer there because they need peace in the region rather than all these strategic escalation and strategic tensions as well. So I think there'll be more and more talks on restoring, recognizing the Palestinian state. If it's going to be Palestinian Authority, I'm not sure what the leadership is going to look like right now. It's going to be talks around dismantling the Israeli cabinet, talks around Hamas strategically stepping aside, but reframing the narrative for the West in line what they do. Talks around a two-state solution, but effectively the GCC will be the new ruler of the region, doing all the investments. Israel is in distress. And so the idea of a one-state solution, returning it to the decolonization that it was before, where essentially Muslim people, Jewish people, Christian people welcomed immigration, lived in peace, but they didn't welcome the settler colonialism, the rape and pillaging and stealing, and building a state the same way America wiped out the native Indians and by the Europeans and all of the colonization that happened from it. They didn't want that to happen. And so I think it will gradually return to an Arab majority. Those that are radicalized will leave the region. There'll be deals that are set around that. And I'm not sure exactly what it's going to look like, but essentially it will look more like a one-state solution where people move in peace. That's a bit more speculative. We'll see. I need to understand a bit more about the deals that will be announced, but I'll keep following the money. And essentially this whole thing of Iran wants to kill the Jews via its proxy and take over the whole region, they'll stop pushing those narratives. And Iran is about to nuke the entire world, and Israel needs to take down its nukes because it's defending democracy and it's a safe place for the Jews, even though it was the least safe place. It was awful for the Jewish people. It was a mechanism for the West being able to recruit Jewish people and make them engage in IDF, join the IDF and ethnically cleanse and essentially sacrifice themselves for the settler colonial mission, which means that you ended up having all of your neighbors hate you. and all the things that come from that, and the resistance, that comes from that. It's just such an obvious lie when you really think about it. So they'll be defanging that narrative between Israel and Iran, and we can stop having all the unnatural operations, the false flag operations, because I believe that the GCC normalized via the China plan, and Iran and Saudi have decided to what it looks like in a pragmatic way, and they have to push narratives out. The axis essentially moves into more, normalization within the regions, whatever that looks like. The idea of Zionism is gradually de-radicalized, because essentially Zionism in Israel has gone from an asset on their balance sheet to a liability on their balance sheet. So I think we're ushering in a new era for the Middle East, over 100 years. I think this is going to be game changing. I think it's going to be for the reason that I covered in the macro section of why this is happening. And the only way to decolonize, and this really relates to why I talk about make yourself great again, is if you learn from these countries. The only reason they were able to engage in the political process was by building enough economic wealth to be able to confront the colonizer by doing economic deals, and going a different path while resistance happens, which leads to the economic destruction of your country. But all together, these different forces led to the situation that we have today, where Jordan and Egypt, even though they were colonized by the International Monetary Fund, their currencies were destroyed. They didn't take the IMF money as they were meant to. They held the borders, which meant that it didn't expand the war into a regional war, which have led to many more deaths, many more disruption, many more forever wars. And Iran essentially, did strategic retaliations, and a more pragmatic approach than things we've seen in the past. I'm no fan of the IRGC. We know that they've made a lot of money when you follow the money out of trying to avoid these sanctions, because sanctions weaken and try and create uprisings. And so you become more authoritarian naturally, because when the CIA is funding, women to create uprising and create narratives like America believing that they're defending democracy and hijab causes and various other things, even though they're not doing that in Saudi Arabia. These are all just justifications to create uprisings. Then you can control the narrative. And I'm not saying that these are good. I believe that they're all committing all sorts of government crimes when you follow the money, but it's nothing like the narrative you've been fed. And this was all about a nuclear energy deal, which when America surrounds them and they're scared for their survival, that ends up enrichment and nuclear weapons. But if you decolonize, do the normalization, we can usher into an era where the American foreign policy in the Middle East has switched from bloodshed and the colonial violence to peace. And that's what I think we're watching right now, and prosperity. And the whole thing has been exposed, and we see the barbarity. We see what our money is funding, and it no longer works. And I hope we can follow this money, and I hope we can split the world up. And I believe competing currencies with competing economic powers with competing blocks means that we never enter into this world anyway. But we know that state power has been consolidated into corporate power like BlackRock, sovereign power through sovereign wealth funds, and they're using that to invest in AI, which I think is going to usher in a world that we've never seen before, which is why we're seeing right now the final escalations to de-escalate in the regions, the settling of different things. And then you suddenly see CNN report that Israel has approved the biggest expansion in the West Bank settlements in decades, a subject they would never have covered before, because it makes Israel and exposes the radical terrorism that was happening through the settler expansion, which is what was happening all along and state-sponsored through these black op networks. And now you see the New York Times come out, and the New York Times reports that Netanyahu has threatened to upend the US-Iran nuclear talks by striking Iran and their nuclear enrichment facilities. As I said a long time ago, there will be no war with US and Iran. The neocon strategy is dead. We're not returning to it. But the reality is that we will find out whether Israel controlled America or America can control Israel. And I believe in the end, after going back and forth, it's obvious. America is controlled by military, and military creates these regions that has plausible deniability for the crimes against humanity. And it was actually America that was controlling Israel. And then you had this proof of weapons network with BlackRock as CEO that consolidated power, and Israel was simply an asset and is now a liability, which is why I think we're seeing this change. We had a few more, and we're going to wrap up right now on the different types of proxy wars. Now, remember what I said. Trump won't be able to achieve the peace between Ukraine and Russia because there's way more money to be made, and BlackRock needs to control more land. There was escalations around that as well. So there was a kind of a distancing from US, from both Putin and Zelensky, because remember what I said, this was a strategic move to hand over everything to Europe. So Europe can ratchet up the narrative so that European Union can set the policy and the European Central Bank can print the money, sanction the money, and spend it into the military industrial complex. And there's at least $1 trillion of profits before peace can even be considered. And so Trump came out on Truth Social and started saying that there's been a breakdown in the relationships with Putin. There were some very unhinged comments blaming both Zelensky and Putin, and you started to see a ratcheting up of that narrative. But he is considering listing sanctions in favor of Zelensky. Why? Because they've already signed their rare earth mineral deals, the rare earth that the BlackRock portfolio companies need. That's why there'll be no ceasefire, in my opinion, because the military industrial complex is in charge of Europe, UK, and US in that faction, whereas the financial industrial complex is in charge of the Middle East. And so there's at least $1 trillion of euros to spend and siphon off from the European people, from the UK people, and from the American people. Also, there was announcements that Germany will provide Ukraine with $5 billion of military packages. So essentially, broke Germany will be able to spend it on military rather than spend on their own people. That ushers in more of the types of civil unrest narratives where people are wondering what's happening with their country. And what are they going to be sending? Long-range missiles. Long-range missiles to Ukraine means further escalation, further deaths on both Russia and Ukraine. The proof of weapons network has no morality. They're not defending democracy. It's all about profits over humanity. And of course, they get to pay for a Starlink subscription. Very important that Starlink benefits so you can get all the data. And at the same, you get all of that data for artificial intelligence and beta test some of these AI warfare weapons that are being beta tested in these playgrounds. Just evil. So what do you get after that? You also started to get an escalation in this whole taco narrative. And Trump doesn't like this one, but this is something that is happening. The taco campaign was Trump always chickens out. And so 2 weeks ago, China was basically this is what he responded. Very unhinged, crazy posts that we're seeing, designed really to just say, can I really trade with the US? China looks way more stable, and so let's do deals with China because I don't know what the future of America is. So let me quote this quote. So on Truth Social, Trump came out and said 2 weeks ago, China was in grave economic danger. They were about to collapse. The very high tariffs I set made it virtually impossible for China to trade into the United States marketplace, which is by far #1 in the world. Right, remember 10% of exports is China. Is China selling to America. America needs those goods, whereas China can produce whatever they want with their own companies. They can start working with America, and they've got almost everything that they need. And they can work with their partners to make up for the lost revenue. Now, I'm not saying a global recession won't cause severe distress for everybody. Of course it will, and that will impact China too. But China's got the sovereign wealth and the reserves that I've covered in previous episodes. So he also said, we went, in effect, cold turkey with China, and it was devastating for them. It was devastating for America. The rates went up. And it's implementing BlackRock's policy. So he's got to push out some MAGA narrative, get the people that don't follow the money to believe we're winning. Many factories closed in US, not China. And there was, to put it mildly, well, there aren't many factories. They're already closed. And there was, to put it mildly, civil unrest. You mean the civil unrest that's happening within America, Europe, and UK? I saw what was happening, and I didn't like it. I don't want this civil unrest to happen. Look, China knows how their government operates. And so they don't get involved in this left and right politics. They just want to build. They can come to university in America. And now what happened? America did the reverse brain drain trade, sent all the Chinese people back home after being educated at Harvard to help the Chinese economy as well. So now they can't be benefits to the US economy, which is immigration is what built much of the country as well. But anyway, happening, and didn't like it for them. So he's saving China because he didn't want civil unrest within China, according to US. It was nothing to do with America. America was winning. America's great. The economy is doing great. Everything's doing great. So Trump said, I made a fast deal with China in order to save them from what I thought was going to be a very bad situation. And I didn't want to see that happening. Because of this deal, everything quickly stabilized and China got back to business as usual, and everything is good. Everybody was happy. That is the good news. The bad news is that China, perhaps not surprisingly to some, has caps totally violated its agreement with us. So now the stock market's going to go down, the rates are going to go up, the economy is going to go bad, unemployment's going to increase, inflation's going to increase. He's going to meet destabilization, but of course it's China violating the agreement, China virus that was funded by Fauci. And so much for being Mr. Nice Guy. We are enemies, we're negotiating, but China is the enemy. I think it's obvious by now. This is a narrative that's just designed for the illiterate, the financially illiterate, that don't follow the money, that will believe them and get absolutely wrecked by this policy. America doesn't care about the American people. UK doesn't care about the UK people. EU doesn't care about the EU people, because all the politicians are prostitutes. All of the resources have been securitized, and there is a stateless entity that controls them all. And all they want to do is asset strip and print money and create all the civil unrest they need to usher in the surveillance state completely against the American, English, and European people. And that has global impact, and that global impact is being strategically weakened because there is a new model. All while artificial intelligence is accelerating at an exponential rate. Agents are taking jobs right now. There isn't enough energy to power all of this. Everybody's deciding, do I go to university? Why spend 3 years studying when I've only got about 3 years until my job probably gets disrupted? Those that already did university, they are deep in debt. They haven't got jobs, and companies are freezing their hiring because they're figuring out this artificial intelligence trend, which is eventually going to be integrated with robotics. And so there is no doubt that you have a short period of time, in my mind, to adjust to this trend, recognize that we are in an AI, Bitcoin, and CBDC world, and you win through economic power. That's how you win. You need to be, the US is being strategically weakened, other than the industries of the BlackRock portfolio companies. The US is becoming a technocracy. The Europe is becoming a central bank digital currency. The GCC that has remained sovereign through Saudi Arabia and UAE and Qatar, they're going to be investing their global capital into real world assets that are tokenized, stable coins that are going to be deploying capital globally. BRICS is going to be investing in the global south. BlackRock is going to be moving its capital to the growth regions, and Trump will be doing the same as well, as covered previously. Robotics are going to be replacing more and more jobs. And how do you protect yourself? It's not by engaging in the politics. It's not by believing that Trump is going to make America great again. It's by building your Bitcoin wealth so you can beat the performance of BlackRock real estate and all the tools that make and weaponize the proof of weapons network. And at the same time, by building your Bitcoin wealth, you get to boycott the Fed and give them less power. At the same time, you get to, by saving in self-custody, that is Bitcoin owned by yourself and not owned by BlackRock, so they have less power in making this transition, and they are strategically weakened at the same time. Because I believe that the AI, the invention, they're going to try and use it for their gain, but it's going to work against them as well. It's going to choose Bitcoin as its currency, as hard money. And in 10 years, we won't be able to recognize the world that we live in. You need to protect your community by not taking on debt, by spending local farmers, local innovation, by boycotting the corporations that are benefiting from this. And you need to take more control over your money rather than handing it over to BlackRock. And this is how you make yourself great again, by being surrounded by a community. And because politicians do not work for you, they work for the proof of work, the weapons network. And you have a small window of time to build your economic power and Bitcoin wealth and lobby against the corporate interest by making sure that your money doesn't go to them, because then they listen and then they become more ethical, because they don't solve humanitarian causes by being ethical. They solve it when their bottom line profit is impacted. And that's why they're banning boycotts. And that's why they're coming up against protesters at universities. That's why when protesters say, we don't want you to send money to the proof of weapons network, we want you to divest, they are changing the constitution. They are creating civil unrest, and they are testing how far they can go and how much you will fall for what was beta tested on Europe and the surveillance state and UK. But always remember, you are alive at one of the most interesting and exciting times in financial history. Some are going to get wrecked on the wrong side of the proof of weapons network. Others are going to do well by storing their wealth in Bitcoin and saving it in self-custody. And I want you to be on the right side of that change, because we are moving to a world of artificial intelligence, Bitcoin, and central bank digital currencies. And I would love to do it with peace, love, and unity. But the reality is that I think those that don't prepare, it's going to be rough for so many of them. So please subscribe to my YouTube channel so you get notifications of the shorter videos, the broke down videos, the longer ones every time I go live. Hit the subscribe button, hit the bell symbol, hit all. Head over to Rumble in case I get taken down and follow me there. Follow me on X. If you would like to watch this in chunks and download it when you're on the move, then follow me on Apple Podcasts, Bitcoin Hard Talk, and Spotify. And if all else fails, you can get lots of free gifts by joining the free Bitcoin Hard Talk membership portal by creating a login at simondixon.com. And so that we can make sure that we do it the right way, which is you become economically powerful and you take control of your money, and we can do it through peace.